When I made the video that attempted to predict Marvel's Phase 4 for their cinematic universe, I thought to myself, well, if DC has all the same tools as Marvel does, why can't they do the same thing? The short answer is that Marvel Studios does a better job of making better movies, but a better answer is to say that Marvel takes their time. Starting in 2008 with Iron Man, the MCU released 5 movies, each about a standalone character and each offering a piece to their big event film in 2012, The Avengers. While most of the movies simply offered up the title character, movies like Iron Man 2 introduced characters like Black Widow and Nick Fury, Thor presented the main villain Loki, and Captain America the Tesseract. Okay, yeah, Iron Man 2 was a little weak on the writing side, but the point is that Marvel took its time to create a foundation for the big movie. It allows each of the standalone movies to tell its own contained story without worrying about sacrificing plot to set up something for later. This is the reason why Marvel's post-credit scenes even exist. Now, Marvel hasn't always been perfect. To say that Marvel has figured out a formula to making good movies implies that every movie is very cookie cutter. And while some critics may agree with that statement, most Marvel movies are pretty unique stories. I say most because the statement does ring true for a few of those movies, mainly Iron Man, Ant-Man, and Doctor Strange, who all feature an asshole main character who gains abilities and after defeating the evil versions of their own characters realizes that those abilities can be used for a greater purpose, which results in becoming a better person. So yeah, Marvel can get very cookie cutter-esque, but Marvel has also made the mistake of thinking too far ahead. Iron Man 2 could be seen as a promo for the Avengers in a certain light, but more specifically, Avengers Age of Ultron is the biggest offender. Not only telling the story of Ultron, the movie had to juggle its cast while introducing 3 new characters, dealing with the growing relationship between the Hulk and Black Widow, but also planting the seeds for the upcoming Civil War, Thor Ragnarok, and of course Infinity War. This resulted in an albeit good movie, but one that does seem to have a little bit too much going on. Warner Brothers and DC, on the other hand, have been plagued by a number of problems. Director issues, bad writing, poor casting, bad editing, learning the wrong lessons from mistakes, and being too reactionary. Let me explain. In 2012, Marvel released The Avengers, and it was at this point that everyone knew exactly what Marvel was doing. In fact, I was included in the group of people that didn't know what they were doing before The Avengers came out. Yeah, I saw Iron Man and Iron Man 2, but I gave The Incredible Hulk, Thor, and Captain America a hard pass. And it wasn't until I realized that Marvel was building a bigger universe did I start to pay attention more, and because of that, I have fallen in love with the MCU. But again, I wasn't the only one, because DC and Warner Brothers noticed it too. The following year, DC put out Man of Steel, a movie that I don't believe was meant to be part of a bigger universe, or maybe it was hoped to have crossed over with the recently concluded Dark Knight trilogy. But Man of Steel, I think, is actually a solid film, dare I say a good one. The movie does have a jarring first act as it flips back and forth between present day and Superman's childhood, but does shorten the boring parts of his origin. The worst part of the movie comes with Kevin Costner's Papa Kent, as he tries to teach a young Superman to maybe ignore the problems that he could easily have solved, like saving a bus filled with his classmates or even his own father from a tornado.
What was I supposed to do? Just let him die?
Maybe.
No, 100% you do not let them die. But I can kind of see what Papa Kent was trying to say. However, the movie doesn't do any of it well.
You saw how Pete's mom reacted? She was scared of Clark. I'm sure what he thought he saw
Was an act of God, Jonathan.
Doesn't seem like fear to me, asshole. And only for Superman to ignore the lesson at the end anyway when he faces Zod. Zod, I actually think, is the best villain in the DC movie universe. His motivations are pretty legit, and in a way, he thinks he is the good guy. Okay, the movie isn't perfect, but it's good enough to build a universe off of, and I think it wasn't a bad start. But then DC tried to play catch-up and released Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. This movie was really where DC and Warner Brothers' problems began. I should say that when it comes to Batman vs Superman that there is a good movie in there, but every time I watch that movie, I can't help but rewrite the movie in my head to produce something better. Not only does the film act as a kind of sequel to Man of Steel, primarily dealing with the aftermath of the battle between Superman and General Zod, but it also has to introduce Batman and the villain Lex Luthor. Honestly, it just should have stopped there. If it had focused on building the conflict between Batman and Superman, which is being manipulated by Luthor behind the scenes, then the film would have been better. But instead, it also tries to jumpstart the universe by introducing Wonder Woman and adding in teases for the other Justice League members while also presenting a looming greater threat. Then the movie takes a turn after the fight between Batman and Superman when they introduce Doomsday, who should totally have not have been in this movie, and this results in the death of Superman that now future movies have to deal with bringing Superman back from the dead. It added more challenges for future films that didn't need to happen. Doomsday should have been saved for a future Man of Steel movie later down the line. That, of course, isn't the only problem with the movie. Lex Luthor is poorly written and poorly portrayed by Jesse Eisenberg. With his motivations all over the place, it made it confusing for the main plot to move forward. Okay, sure, Lex doesn't trust Superman, but why is Batman the perfect person to eliminate him? How did Lex learn that Bruce Wayne is actually Batman? Why didn't Lex just use the kryptonite to make bullets and kill Superman that way? He makes it clear in the movie that it isn't hard to get his attention. Before the fight even starts, why don't Superman and Batman just have a simple conversation? Okay, yeah, Superman did try to talk to Batman before the fight started, but why didn't Batman let Superman talk? Why didn't Batman also make kryptonite bullets and load them into the machine guns that he totally fires at Superman? Why does Superman see Batman reload the kryptonite gas and then run right at him, knowing full well the effect that gas has on him? Why does the kryptonite spear have to be so far away from where the fight started? Why didn't Batman start with the spear? And why is this the way the fight ends?
Martha! Why did you say that name?
The movie is plagued by more than a few issues. It was a movie that should have focused on the Batman v Superman part of the movie and not the Dawn of Justice part. So DC and Warner Brothers see the response to this movie and sit back to set up the next film, Suicide Squad. And what is the big lesson that they pull from Batman vs Superman? The movie was too dark, so we need to add more comedy like what Marvel does. So we get Suicide Squad, and the movie is an edited mess. Apparently, after the order came down to add more comedy, the studio pulled the editing group that cut the movie's first official trailer to fix the movie. What came out was a movie that was clearly cut by multiple teams. The first act of the movie is just characters that we had never seen before being suddenly introduced with their theme songs. Then the movie is made worse by the lack of character build, interactions with the team members, another bad villain with confusing motivations, and a fan favorite character in the Joker being shoehorned into a movie he has no reason to be in. Not to mention that they got the relationship of Harley Quinn and the Joker all sorts of wrong. The Joker does not care about Harley. She is blindly in love with him, and he uses that to manipulate her. But really, the Joker is extremely abusive, both physically and mentally. So, quite simply, he wouldn't have bothered to free her from prison. In fact, there was once a time that Harley stopped helping the Joker for years, and when she returned, he didn't even notice that she was gone. Ultimately, this movie's biggest issue is having been made at all. What I mean is that there is no business for this movie to be at this point in the lineup. It's just too early. But going back to this idea of DC and Warner Brothers learning the wrong lessons, in response to Suicide Squad, which again suffered from bad writing and editing, the studio figured that, okay, well, people liked Harley Quinn and Deadshot, so let's give them more of those characters by announcing a standalone Deadshot movie and a Gotham City Sirens. It's like DC is ignoring the bigger issues and just focusing on the little good and not worrying about why the issues were issues to begin with. They are learning the wrong lessons. What DC should have done is have movies like Batman or The Flash introduce these smaller villainous characters, and then over time with more movies introduce more until at some point in phase 2 or 3, we've introduced enough to pull them in for a Suicide Squad film. Instead, we are barely introduced to these new characters that the movie keeps reminding me are the bad guys, and somehow we have to care about them? Yeah, no. Also, the movie doesn't really do anything to add to the universe. None of these characters appear in Justice League, and the only real build to Justice League comes from a post-credit scene where Bruce Wayne receives dossiers on Aquaman, Cyborg, and The Flash from Amanda Waller. Okay, so I'll give the movie that. It didn't waste time during the core movie to build towards something for later, and it uses a post-credit scene to offer up a little tease. But why was this the tease? Batman had already received info on these people from Lex's files. Why did he need more? All right, so admittedly at this point I'm kind of nitpicking, but it doesn't really improve the movie anyway. Basically, Suicide Squad was a movie that was made when it shouldn't have been. Then we get to Wonder Woman, which is far and beyond the best movie of the current run. Wonder Woman does not make the same mistakes as the other films. It focuses on telling its own contained story. The portrayal of Wonder Woman herself was great, and the writing made the plot coherent and had properly placed humor throughout. Yeah, the villain was your typical bad guy who had little on the side of motivation, but he wasn't bad per se, just not great. But in essence, the movie stood on its own and did offer a little bit of connective tissue when Diana has a brief email exchange with Bruce Wayne in one of the movie's closing scenes, but it doesn't feel out of place. It adds to the movie as it transitions from the past to the modern day, while also giving the audience a little nod toward the bigger world. It all adds up to be a great film. Then we get to Justice League, and I'll say this. I will say that Justice League isn't a bad movie. It did have an uphill battle for having to introduce Aquaman, Cyborg, and The Flash while also juggling Batman, Wonder Woman, and Superman. The interactions between Batman and Wonder Woman are nice to see, some of the action scenes are entertaining, and when he shows up, we see what I believe to be the best portrayal of Superman in a movie. However, it's not without flaw. The villain was straight garbage. Why was he CGI? He didn't need to be. Going with practical effects would have been much better. Speaking of Superman, the movie's plot does lean a little too heavily on him. After the Justice League struggles with Steppenwolf the whole time, Superman just shows up and essentially bitch slaps him. I realize that this is used as a triumphant return after Superman comes back from the dead, but I wish that the movie had done a better job of making him seem not so overpowered. It would have been better if Steppenwolf had given Superman just a little bit of trouble. The movie was also troubled with director problems when Zack Snyder was fired during production and Warner Brothers brought in Joss Whedon, which resulted in a lot of extensive reshoots and ultimately led to the CG removal of a mustache to give us this. Despite its shortcomings, Justice League is a relatively good and entertaining movie, but unfortunately it is also the least profitable by raking in almost $658 million, which currently sits at the lowest of the 5 movies, which is absurd when you think to yourself that this is the first time DC's big team was featured on the big screen. The point is, the DC movie universe started good, but due to significant struggles along the way, has been received by the general movie-going audience as being just meh. When a Marvel movie releases, everyone drops everything to go see it right away. But when a DC movie releases, most people just wait for it to appear on cable or available to stream. That's not good. So the all-important question, can the DC movie universe course correct? With movies like Aquaman, which comes out December 21st later this year, and Shazam coming out in April next year, with Wonder Woman 2 not that far behind, is there hope? I think that yes, the DCMU can indeed move forward with what has already been established, and by creating better movies with a better focus, they could become the next great cinematic universe. And we'll talk about that at a later date. But for now, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.